This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts. Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Everybody Lies, our House MD episode by episode podcast, the greatest House MD episode by episode podcast to ever exist. Throwing a little shade. Shade never made anybody less gay, but it never made a house podcast any good. It's a line from Taylor Swift's song, You Need to Calm Down. Calm down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever.
She says, she's talking about people talking about gay people on the internet, and she was like, hey, why don't you need to, stop with all this hate, because shade never made anybody less gay.
Well, I've been a bigot my entire life, but now that I've heard that, I'm cured.
Exactly. That is what her songs are meant to do.
They're about healing. To
change people's minds. Anyway, so this episode is about homosexuals, and this episode is called...
Ooh, that's a good one, Mark.
Detox?
Detox, yep, that's it.
All right. So, the episode begins with everybody's favorite blonde weirdo, Amanda Seyfried, I believe her name is, how she says her name. She's from, we talked about Seth MacFarlane in the regular show. She's from that A Million Ways to Die in the West movie. She's the one that ends up with Neil Patrick Harris. And then she was in also Ted, actually, now that I think about it. And she was in something else. But I remember her. I first noticed her in the TV show Big Love, when she was the oldest.
Oh, I've never seen that.
Yeah, she was the oldest daughter. She's a pretty attractive young lady.
Oh, yeah, I don't feel the same way. I do know her from the movie Mean Girls, which my wife makes me watch all the time, especially when she's not even there.
Oh, yeah, she is in that movie. She's the one who can tell it's raining. Man? She's the one who can tell it's raining by her breasts.
Right. Did you recognize the young man?
He's from Election, I believe.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, he's the kid from Election who finds out that Matthew Broderick's sister's cheating.
Yeah, that look on his face.
Yeah, and then he spits on his car window.
His dad is also in Election. Now that I think about it.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, the guy that plays his dad is the Matthew Broderick's friend who fucks Tracy Flick and then gets forced out.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah, it is nice.
Well, I mean that he was in the movie.
Oh my god. So
that is a great movie. Everybody go watch Election. That's good. That's a good movie.
Yes, Election is a very strong film. I love the guy that's in American Pie, whose name I can't think of. I think it's Chris something.
Chris Evans.
Yeah, Chris Evans. But he's the brother. He's hilarious.
He was actually engaged to Katie. He was engaged to Katie Holmes at one point too.
Was he? Oh, good for him.
Yep. Yeah, and then she left him for Tom Hanks.
Wow, what a great career move. But anyway, so yeah, they're both from Election, but she's straddling this young man with only her bra on, and basically she's implying that, hey, your dad's not going to be home for a while. Where's the stuff? Get it out. Stick it in me. And she's referring to a car key because she wants to take his Porsche. So they go and, she's driving the Porsche. She's like, oh my God, I love this car and everything. And he starts coughing. She looks at the rearview mirror and she realizes he's coughing up blood. So she jams on the brakes. Now, I'm not a big car guy, but I looked this up, everybody, just so we had some information to give you people. Apparently, Porsche, especially Porsche 911s, which is the brand of car that they're driving, are very notable for their incredibly good anti-lock brakes, which means that what happens is she gets distracted because she sees he's coughing up blood. Then she jams on the brakes because there's a truck coming across. I thought this was a Final Destination movie at the very beginning because she jams on the brakes, the car turns sideways, and they go completely under this truck, and then they get hit by a bus coming.
Right.
It's a very Final Destination esque like type scene, but apparently the Porsche's anti-lock brake systems are so good that there's no way this would happen. Once she jammed on the brakes, they basically would have just stopped on a dime.
Fair enough.
But so he gets in the he gets sent to the emergency room. He broke his leg, and now there's complications arising because he has hemophiliac. What do they call it? Oh man, they use the word a few different times.
Gingivitis.
Yeah, it's gingivitis of hemophilia. Now, basically, his red blood cells are disintegrating themselves, and they don't know why. At the same time, House's drugs aren't there because they accidentally got rerouted to research. I don't know how that happens, but he's got to wait an hour until his pills get there, and when they finally arrive, he's got the most satisfied look on his face when he takes this pill, which has got to be psychosomatic, because I know that opiates can work quickly, but not that fast.
Right. Do you think that that was set up by Cuddy or Wilson, that part? Like, did they deliberately just to see how how bad he was?
Well, yeah, based on what we find out at the end, and because I was gonna bring that up as like a continuity error, basically, because it looks like Cuddy sees him taking the pill, sees the satisfied look on his face, and then goes and starts talking to him about his possible drug problem, like immediately. But yeah, what you said actually makes it make sense then if they set that up prior to. So yeah, I think that's a very good theory.
But yeah, Cuddy bets House. She basically poorly negotiates a entire month off of clinic duty.
Yep.
If he doesn't use Vicodin for a week.
Yep.
Like she's like the worst negotiator ever. For someone who's like the head of the hospital, you think she'd be a little better at that.
Yeah, she's like a week off clinic duty, and he of course turns that down. And then she doesn't even like negotiate, like you said. She's just like, okay, 2 weeks. No, 3 weeks, a month. And then finally he's like, okay, a month, that's good. So he hands her Vicodin, throws her Vicodin, and says, okay, I'm going off for a week. So this patient, this is coming, like he's looking around, or he's looking at the stuff, and he's like, he asks a bunch of questions. He's like, well, does he have an artificial heart valve? It must be an inherited condition, but it's not, and all this stuff. And he's like, it's, this is interesting and weird. This shouldn't be happening. He's only a 16-year-old kid. So he gets super interested in this case. Cameron, and they take, it's interesting because it does kind of links up with the final solution of this case. But they show Cameron taking a pretty detailed family history of the dad, where they've been. They went to China, they got shots. It's a lot of things where it's like it's almost kind of like a red herring, I suppose, because it's a lot of things where they're giving you a lot of information, a lot of potential clues as to what the final diagnosis might be. And his mom had cancer. She died of pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
So they do, they've got several different theories. They say it could be lupus. This is the first time that they ever bring up lupus
right.
as a possibility, which is great. They say it could be lupus, which does actually kind of make sense to certain degrees. Or it could be cancer. It could be an infection. And I think there was one more thing that they tested for. I can't think of what it might be. But they do a gallium scan to test for an infection, because he's got a slightly elevated temperature. It's 99.2. Obviously, it's not a huge deal, but he's got a slightly elevated temperature. They do the gallium scan for that. They do an ANA. I believe that stands for anti-nuclear antibodies, I believe, or something like that, or anoid nuclear antibodies, something like that. It's an autoimmune test, basically. I looked it up a while ago, but I
Yeah, and
can't.
this is the one where it does like 90% of people with lupus will test like one way for this. Is
Y-
that still what you're talking about?
yeah, exactly. It ends up being cloudy because um but yeah, it's a yeah, that I was right. Anti-nuclear antibody. Basically, it's testing the antibodies in your blood because people that have autoimmune diseases are, they affect the immune system. So you would you would see these weird types of cells. Oh, drugs. That was the other thing
Oh yeah,
because
yeah, that's right.
because they suspect that maybe Amanda Seyfried has slipped him drugs because she went into rehab in the ninth grade, I guess.
Yeah, the father really does not care for her at all. He's
No.
constantly trying to, blame her for the, the illness.
Yeah, she was the one that wanted to drive the Porsche and all this shit and everything. Um, but yeah, so they they test him for drugs. They test his hair. Uh, Negative for drugs, negative on the ANA, which means he doesn't have an autoimmune disease. Which, by the way, eventually they are going to say that they think it's lupus. That should really that should really rule it out pretty heavily.
Yeah, I
The
think Cameron insists though that there's still the 10% chance, so it's possible that he does have it, and just
yeah,
is part of that small group.
I guess, and she is the immunologist, so. But the gallium scan's clear. He doesn't seem to have any kind of infection in his heart or anything like that, which would cause this kind of internal bleeding and destruction of the red blood cells. And the cancer, they had to diagnose the lymph nodes, and all the cells are normal. There are no cancer cells in his lymph nodes, so it does not look like it is cancer. Um,
Yeah, and at this point, he starts to complain about his eye. Like he says, everything's going dark in it.
Yep, yep. And it turns out that he's got a blood clot that clots in his eye, which is weird because he's bleeding and clotting, and as they point out in the episode, they're opposite processes. So it's weird that both things could be happening at once.
And then, of course, they immediately say, "Well, we can't really give him blood thinners because he's already bleeding too much as it is, so he's
Yep.
going to lose the eye."
Yeah, exactly. And because the kid asks, he's like, the blindness is going to be permanent, and Chase kind of just nods and says, "Yeah." And
Yeah,
House isn't much help because he is going through some pretty bad detoxing.
right. And they basically he says he has 2 hours to be able to find out what the problem is, or the eye's gone forever.
Yep, exactly. And then Chase, in one of the first times he ever comes up with any kind of good idea, says, "Hey, what if he's like, I think there's something we can do for the eye." And House is like, the eye's fucked, forget it. Let's try to save his life. And he's like, but if we suck out some of the fluid, then the clot might from the eye, then the clot might just move on its own. It'll have more room to move there because there'll be less swelling and it might move on its own. And House is like, oh, it's a creative idea. And he's like, why didn't you bring this up a couple hours ago? And he's like, I just thought of it now.
Right, right.
He's like, well, you should have thought of it earlier.
Yeah, which is even when he finally comes up with a good idea, like House like doesn't miss the opportunity to chastise him.
Right. So he does.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
and we forgot right before this. There's a kind of funny scene where like House like looks over and there's like this extremely attractive woman like doing stretches.
Oh yeah, she is very attractive.
Yes, and this is where like Wilson, like basically Wilson shows up and he's like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna hang out with you guys. I'm in charge of the department. I can do what I want." He basically flat out says as much.
Right. He's like, oh, I'm just hanging out here, and he's like, oh, Cuddy brought you to spy on me. He's like, no, 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 no. I just don't want you to start like shooting people from a clock tower like it's 1966.
Right.
But yeah, it is pretty clear because he hired the masseuse. It's pretty clear that he came there just to see her.
Yeah. Like at first, the House actually thinks she's a prostitute, which I can see why the way she's like stretching and
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
But yeah, it's a very attractive masseuse. Yeah, so like you said, Chase actually figures something out for once in his fucking life.
Right. So they do it, and the clot actually does move, and he can start to see again, which is nice. But he's still he's still circling the drain, as they say.
Isn't that kind of dangerous? So just like to let a like clot loose in like someone's bloodstream.
You would think so, especially in the eye, fairly close to the brain.
Yeah, it's already in the head.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't think it would be the best thing to do, but I guess it just dissolves. I don't know. Like I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I would
So you
think
think
because
it's
blood thinners, the reason blood thinners help work is because blood thinners basically they they dissolve and break down clots that are able to do that. And for ones that aren't, there are clot busting drugs, but that they have now. I don't know if they were even actually available when this was filmed or not. But yeah, I don't know enough about medicine to know what the dangers would be, but it seems like it would be pretty dangerous.
right, but yeah, so he he lets this clot loose, and then the Amanda Seyfried girl shows up again. The kid just starts vomiting everywhere,
Yeah, throws up all over her right after she kisses him.
or like his liver is like shutting down, so they rush him over to the ICU. Then House just like snaps at the guy's dad because the team assumes it's a Vicodin.
Yeah, yeah, and he's basically because he's like it's not the kidneys because they gave him extra antibiotics to fight an infection because that was kind of their best guess of what might be causing this. And Chase said, that much antibiotics is going to box his kidneys, and his numbers start declining. So they're taking him, like you said, they're taking him to the emergency, and um House is like, it's not the antibiotics, it's not his kidneys, it's his liver. And the dad goes, what does that mean? And House goes, it means he's all better and he can go home. What do you think it means? He can't live without his liver. He's dying, and he gets all pissed off. And I think as Cameron comes over there, and she's like, what are you doing? Snapping at dad. Like, his son's dying. He's scared. He's like, it's a stupid question. And he goes, no. And she said, no, it's not. And it really isn't a stupid question, because it's like, basically what he's asking is, oh, his liver's failing. What does that tell you? What could be doing this? I mean, that's basically what he's asking him, which is a perfectly normal question to ask.
This is, of course, the thing that only happens in TV shows where the parents actually able to see the child being transported, and they are able to rush up and ask questions.
Right, exactly. So they, they say that, like, his liver's failing. They're not sure exactly why, but they get him on some medication, and he's going to need a liver transplant, basically. So
yeah, House thinks he has this hepatitis E thing.
Yes.
So he gets this drug that'll make him just a little worse. So they can diagnose it properly. But if he doesn't have it, then they think he probably does have lupus.
Yeah.
But then if they treat him for the lupus and it actually is the hepatitis, then they'll kill the patient. So House kind of like talks to Cameron to tell her, tell him that we're treating him for this because, but we're not, because it will actually kill him.
Right. Exactly. And House points out that hepatitis E is a long shot diagnosis, but lupus isn't a great diagnosis either. And he points out, I think he points out a couple times in this episode, the time course is way too accelerated for, which is funny because they rarely mention the time course of diseases in the show because they have to accelerate a lot of them in order to fit it into like a one episode thing. Because some of these diseases take like years to get to certain points. But in this one, he mentions it because he's like, it shouldn't, even really aggressive multi-organ lupus, that's basically just a fatal diagnosis anyway, shouldn't move this quickly. Because it's like, it's going from like the heart it's going from the vessels to the heart to the liver, like in the course of like a week.
Right.
It's way too fast. But yeah, so
then House actually breaks his hand at this point because he's trying to distract himself from the addiction.
Yeah, apparently, as Wilson says, there's a pain gating system in the brain. I assume this is true, that the brain registers the most severe pain and blocks all other pain out.
Yeah, it could be.
I guess it would make sense.
I don't know if addiction's a pain, though. I guess there's physical withdrawals, I assume.
Yeah. I guess it makes sense on an evolutionary standpoint for your brain to try to signal you to the most severe thing that's going wrong with you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But anyway, so he's like, did it work? And he's like, my hand hurts and, my leg feels fine. So I think actually what he's trying to do is distract himself from the pain in his leg because, as Cuddy pointed out, and I guess this is true, I don't know enough about opioid addiction to know this either, but she points out that if he's not addicted, then he'll have some pain, which will be hard, but he won't have withdrawal symptoms. But if he is addicted, he'll have withdrawal symptoms, one of which will be the pain in his leg being like 5 to 10 times worse than he's ever felt. So I'm guessing that he is going through that like increased pain and trying to distract himself from that. I guess I don't know. But he says to him, "Don't give me a full cast, just bandage it, so I want to be able to slam it into a wall."
Right.
If I need to. God. But yeah, so they Cameron doesn't want to lie. We start to see the dynamic of the three of them as it relates to House. Normally, Foreman thinks that House is wrong all the time and tries to prove him wrong. Either Chase or Cameron always want to prove him right. One of those two,
right.
Always kind of have faith in him and want to prove him right. So, that's sort of like the dynamic. In this case, it's Chase, and Cameron is kind of caught in the middle, like, I don't know what to do because I don't really want to lie to this guy. So she ends up saying to him that she thinks he's got lupus. House decides that what he's going to do is refuse to treat him for lupus, and the guy wants to move the kid, and he's like, no, he's not stable enough to be moved. So he's playing a game of chicken with him, as Cuddy points out. And House says, well, I should win pretty easily. He's the dad. He's the one that actually cares about the kid's life. So it should be pretty easy to win, which he does. And the guy allows him to start treating for the hepatitis E. But
at this point, the kid just starts spraying blood out of his anus.
Yeah, they don't get a chance to because he starts hallucinating. His cat, Jules, is on him, and he's like, "Jules, get off, get off!" And then he's leaking blood from his anus, all over the bed. And
so now they do another test in angiography. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
They find out he has severe internal bleeding, and his liver is just failing on him right now. And Cameron says, "Oh shit, he probably does have lupus because of these these hallucinations."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, psychosis is one of the symptoms.
And then, as you point out, House says, "Well, it's going way too fast." So she thinks House just fucked up, and now the kid needs a new liver.
And he wants to know who Jules is.
Right, yeah. So House says put him on the transplant list, and they talk to Cuddy about trying to move it up quicker, which I assume that's possible. I don't know. That's kind of weird.
I assume it's possible, although in this case, I can't imagine he'd even qualify. He has an undiagnosed, potentially fatal illness that's fried his liver that they don't know what it is. Their best guess is that it's multi-organ lupus, which is fatal anyway, so it's basically just like wasting a liver, because it might give him... If it's moving this fast, who knows how much time it actually would buy him? But it might give him maybe a year or something like that at best. But I can't imagine he'd even qualify for a transplant, to be honest.
Right, this kid's young, so he's clearly not even a Hall of Fame baseball player. So why would you move him up the list?
Exactly. In the real world, his youth is really the only thing that he has going for him as far as the transplant committee would be concerned with. But like I said, with an undiagnosed disease like this, especially one that seems to be affecting the organs, I don't even think he'd qualify. But House comes and he asks who Jules is, and the dad says it's the cat, the family cat, and he says, well, it's not psychosis then. And Foreman, he sounds like he's appalled and like unbelieving when he says this, but what he says is absolutely right. He's like, so if he imagined a cat that didn't exist, then it's psychosis and it could be lupus because he imagined a cat that does exist, it's not psychosis. And I'm just sitting there like, yes, Foreman, you're a neurologist. You should know that is the case. I mean, like we've talked about before, it's the difference between hallucinations and delusions and stuff. Not to imagine, to hallucinate something that is familiar to you that actually exists is not a sign of psychosis. It's a sign of neurological problems, but not necessarily. I mean, I guess it could be, but not necessarily psychosis. And the dad points out, well, the cat's dead. Doesn't exist anymore because the cat's dead. Luckily, instead of incinerating the cat like most animals, like unfortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess they're dead, so it doesn't really matter at that point. But like happens to most animals, when either they're put down or they die naturally, you take them to the vet and stuff. They buried this cat, so they're able to dig it up and do what they call an autopsy. Although in this case, it would actually be necropsy, because it's after the burial. So that's after a body's exhumed, they call it a necropsy.
Isn't that the name of that metal band you were in for a while?
Yes, exactly. House is wrong, necropsy. That's what we call ourselves. But so
Yeah, that was probably one of the many issues with that group.
so he does the procedure on the cat, and he discovers something that we don't know right away what it is. But the liver's there, and the kid's getting wheeled in to get his liver transplant. So House runs in dramatically, as it is on TV all the time. It's just he runs in right before the surgery is about to start in the nick of time, and says, "Hey, stop! You can't do the surgery. He's got, it's naphthalene. His cat died of naphthalene poisoning. Termites make it to build their nests, which is all that's true. And he this is what he's got, so you can't do the surgery. It's a poison, and it's in his bloodstream." And the surgeons are like, we're doing it anyway. I don't care what you say.
We have a liver here, House. You know how hard these things are to get?
Exactly. House has already contaminated the room by coming in there without washing or anything. So at that point, they shouldn't be doing the surgery anyway. But
and a nurse says as much. She says we have to stop because he's already come in here, and that kind of just inspires House.
Yeah. So House just throws the naphthalene on the instruments, and then hawks a loogie onto the surgeon, and sneezes and wipes his face with one of the rags, and says that he's been feeling sick. And then, yeah, like you said, the nurse goes, "Well, we can't do the surgery now." The surgeon goes, "You think?" So the dad is pissed, obviously, and punches House in the face.
Which might be the first time House gets punched in the show, but it is not the last time.
No, not at all. But he's like, "I want him locked up," and he sounds like he could have been in our death metal band. But he says that he trashes liver. He's like, "We're doing the surgery and everything," and House says, "Look, the cat didn't die of old age. Cat died of naphthalene poisoning, which causes internal bleeding, affects the liver, all this stuff. And all the stuff that's happening with your son, it's what your son has. What's going to happen is he's going to lay on his bed. This poison is going to, for 14 hours while they do the surgery, this poison is going to continue to go into his bloodstream, and he's going to die." And the reason he got, notably, they asked if they should check out the home and stuff, and he said no. It's one of the one times he doesn't send him to the house, right, because he says if it's an environmental cause, then he'll get better once, from being here. But naphthalene is a fat soluble gas. So what happened is the food in the hospital's terrible. He never wanted to eat. He's lost 14 pounds, which is cause for concern in itself. Go and get him a fucking sandwich from a fast food place or something. How is this kid losing 14 pounds while he's supposed to be recovering in the hospital? But anyway, he's lost 14 pounds, and since this is a fat-soluble gas, as his body is burning fat, it's releasing the gas into his bloodstream. Now, there's a continuity issue here. House's diagnosis, and this is, it's true in general from what I read about naphthalene poisoning. It is a fat-soluble gas, and it does make sense that he'd start to get bleeding if he was losing a bunch of weight from being in the hospital because of the car accident. But what caused the car accident was him
that's what I was
coughing up blood.
Right. So he already had symptoms then. So I don't understand, why it would be affecting him. And then, oh, now it's affecting. I mean, it was already affecting him.
Exactly.
Maybe just in all the, the hoopla, Amanda Seyfried didn't mention that he was coughing up blood. I guess I guess that's the only possible solution to why they
Maybe.
weren't looking at that earlier. But yeah, if what he in fact said happened is why it happened, it shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so they, they go to the house. For some reason, the two doctors go to the house again. I mean, the case is pretty much over, so I don't know why they're doing this. But they break, they break down the walls, and there are tons of termites that come out of the walls. But so it kind of confirms the diagnosis of naphthalene poisoning, and House has got his answer, and then I guess the denouement or whatever is the stuff with his week that he got through of not taking Vicodin. Oh, I forgot to point out.
Foreman did offer him Vicodin at one point because he thought he was kind of fucking up because he wasn't on it.
Yeah, I forgot to point out that Foreman did that.
As far as I know, this episode didn't have like a clinic patient of the week. I mean, obviously he was having the whole contest with Cuddy. I assume he didn't have to go to the clinic during that time, but I don't think he had a clinic patient.
No, this is one of the there are a few episodes. They're few and far between, but there are a few episodes where they don't actually have a clinic patient. And this is one of those.
I'm assuming there's an episode where he's just in the clinic full time at some point. I really am looking forward to that one.
Yes, I believe there's at least one. If there might be two, where he's in the clinic the entire time. But yes.
Yeah, so that's this episode. I liked it. I do like the clinic parts, but it wasn't there. But I thought it was. I guess this actual disease is almost impossible to actually get from termites. Like the concentration, you'd probably have to sleep in like a termite, mound in like Australia for like 10 years, something like that.
Yeah, it's people don't. It's also in mothballs, as they point out.
Yeah, that's what they thought it was.
It's yeah. I don't know exactly what the this is one of those things where it's not like really a disease. It's it's a poisoning basically. But I don't know what the I don't know what the instances would be. Like you said, I'm pretty sure it's almost impossible to get it. I also don't think there's treatment. Like it's funny because they don't, like, a lot of times they'll go through the treatment and everything of the disease, which they notably don't in this episode. And I think it's because I don't think there's actually a treatment for naphthalene poisoning, especially
I don't know.
Especially once it's progressed this far. I think it's basically just, well, he's dead then.
I guess unless you just make him constantly eat so much that he doesn't burn any fat, which probably isn't very healthy either.
Right. But the episode ends with Cuddy conceding and everything, and Wilson comes to talk to him, and House says that he learned, this week, that he is addicted, that he's an addict, but it's not a problem because it doesn't control his life. He's in control of his life, and it allows him to do what he needs to do. Wilson argues that, Wilson's like, look, I knew you before this happened with your leg. And what's going on with you is not just getting older. Like, you don't have friends. You're isolated from everybody. You're becoming a miserable prick. And, like, all this stuff's going on. It's not just getting older. It's not just pain. It's not just the leg. You've changed. And, House screams at him that, of course he's changed because, this pain has changed him and everything. But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty powerful moment. The friendship between House and Wilson is a huge part of the show, and it's going to start to, it gets deeper and deeper as it goes along, which is a nice thing about it. But then, we get to the end of the episode. Cuddy says, "How did it go?" He says, that he admits he has an addiction, but he says it's not a problem. He's not going to do anything about it. And Wilson's like, maybe he's right. I don't know. Maybe I'm an idiot. And she says, hopefully he never finds out that all this was your idea. And he's
Right.
like, oh, he'd never believe it if he never believed that this was me. So yeah, we find out that it was all Wilson's idea for this bet.
Yeah, so yeah, it's I'm sure that'll continue with his addiction and stuff. But I like the episode. This was actually Hugh Laurie was nominated for an Emmy for this episode. Did you know that?
No, no, I didn't.
I mean, so I mean, I wouldn't say it's if it's the best episode of the season. I wouldn't be. I mean, that's fine. It's a really good episode. I mean, I've seen the ones that I've liked better so far, but
Hmm.
this is a very good episode, and Hugh Laurie's very good in it.
Yeah, it's a good episode. I guess they probably nominated him for it because of the detox and like how he plays it and everything. Maybe.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess
I
I,
think
I can see it.
it looks realistic to me. You know.
Yeah, I can see it. But yeah, I mean there are better episodes this season, I think, as far as the show goes. But almost all the episodes in season one I think are pretty solid, pretty good.
It could have been
Um,
a deadline thing too. You know, like maybe they had to submit it before a certain time.
yeah, it could be for sure. But yeah, that's the episode this week. As always, tell some friends. You got friends that love House. Tell them that our show exists and pretend that other show doesn't exist.
Right.
But we will see you next time. Bye.
See you next time.